Thank you for joining us for this episode of Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories. I am your host, Allison Preisinger-Higgins. Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories is a podcast exploring society, culture, and current events through conversation. We aspire to create an open, respectful, and equitable space where guests may feel free to share their truth and lived experiences. Our core values are rooted in community, connection, and personal development. Stories help us learn, relate, and grow. We are here to listen, to take notice. Thank you for being with us. I would like to show gratitude to the traditional ancestral land of the Puyallup people past and present on which this episode was created. I encourage listeners to research the land on which you live and are listening right now. Recognizing this is just the beginning. The more you explore, challenge, and learn, the more questions may arise, but this is how we grow and connect. On this episode of Take Notice, we welcome Kathryn Leary. It's hard to know exactly where to begin with the introduction of Kathryn Leary because this conversation is full of amazing stories that Kathryn so generously shared with us. From being surrounded by music growing up, to meeting Bob Marley, to meeting all kinds of other amazing figures, being surrounded by the arts growing up with her cousin who was in the very first production of Raisin in the Sun, to her journey to the wellness world, from business and marketing to entrepreneurship and becoming a yoga instructor herself. She is a multi-talented entrepreneur, marketing professional, writer, and experienced yoga and meditation instructor. And I feel like we barely scratched the surface of all that she does, but her expertise in meditation has been honed through extensive training in the United States and India. Notably, she has developed specialized yoga and meditation programs for individuals with diverse challenges such as physical disabilities, cancer survivors, autism, ADD, and anxiety. So Kathryn is the co-founder and CEO of OneFireLight, an innovative fitness and wellness platform offering a wide range of video-on-demand classes and content. Their goal is to bring balance to the body, mind, and spirit with classes ranging from yoga, Pilates, meditation, boxing, dance cardio, strength training, to sound meditation. And she goes into more depth on all the wonderful things that OneFireLight has to offer and how it was developed. So please enjoy this episode with Kathryn Leary. All right. Well, Kathryn, thank you so much for joining me on Take Notice today. How are you?
I am fine and very happy to be with you, Allison.
Good. I'm excited to hear what you have to share today and where our conversation goes. Where are you joining me from today? I think you're a little bit ahead of me.
Physically, I'm in Philadelphia right now.
In Philadelphia. Oh, okay. Awesome. Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Where are you?
I'm in Seattle, Tacoma, but just south of Seattle. So, yeah. So we're 3 hours difference, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Have you lived in Philadelphia for a while, or?
No, we just have an office here as well that I work out of at times.
Oh, okay.
We just launched our e-commerce, and so we are running that from this location. The company is headquartered in New York City.
Oh, I see.
I am a New Yorker. Went to undergraduate school in Ohio, so I got a little taste of the Midwest. And then I went to graduate school out in California, so I got that taste of the West Coast.
Oh.
And grew up, though, in the New York area.
Awesome. What part of New York did you grow up in?
I was born in Brooklyn and then spent some time, I guess the first 9 years of my life, in St. Albans, Queens. And then my family moved to Westchester County. And I grew up primarily from the age of 9 until graduating grad school in White Plains, New York.
Oh, okay. I'm not as familiar with where that might be. Where is that? Where is White Plains?
Well, it's about 25, 30 miles north of New York City. So it's
okay.
a comfortable suburb of the city, of New York City.
Oh, I see. Okay. It's a little more spread out. Is that accurate or no?
Yes. Oh, yes. It's not as dense as the city.
Yeah.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I grew up with a backyard and a school that was on a beautiful campus, a high school that was in this beautiful wooded area. So, yeah, very different from the city.
That sounds really nice.
Yeah, it was a blessing.
What did your parents do when you were growing up?
My mom was a nurse, which is partly why I'm in the wellness industry now. And she was a very dedicated, committed nurse. She was a nurse for 44 years. We spent a lot of time around the dinner table talking about medicine and talking about health and talking about the importance of caring for yourself so that you can stay healthy as long as possible. Talking about the politics of healthcare in America. So those were the kinds of conversations. My dad was a very interesting person. They're both deceased, but my father worked for the New York City Transit Authority and was basically a token clerk, a person who provided the tokens for people to enter into the subway system. All that's pretty much done away with now because it's all Metro cards and electronic. But back in the day, person-to-person contact. And, I had friends whose parents were lawyers and they'd go to work with them on Take Your Child to Work Day. And I would go with my dad to the token booth and learn how to exchange money and tokens.
Oh, wow.
And he was also a serial entrepreneur. He was an amazing chef. He's of the Bahamian culture. So his family migrated to the Bahamas when he was a baby. And so he grew up with all the wonderful, delectable delights of the Bahamas and loved to cook. And so he had several different restaurants in my lifetime.
Oh, wow.
Not always successful, not always successful. And that's where I learned what it means to be an entrepreneur, to never give up. My father would have a restaurant, a little Greasy Spoon in Harlem or something in the Bronx, and something would inevitably go wrong. There'd be a flood and the place was destroyed or whatever. And my mom would be like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And my father was the next day right back in the classified section of the New York Times looking to see where there was another opportunity.
Wow.
And so I grew up with that resilience, that idea that you chase your dream, you believe in possibilities.
What a great influence. That the restaurant industry now is hard. I imagine it's always hard. And that sounds tough. So yeah. What's one of the main couple of foods that you'd say from the Bahamas? Or is there? This is probably a lot.
Peas and rice is something that people love to eat. Conch is a fish. I don't know if you're familiar with conch.
I think so. I think it's
like a mollusk, right? It comes from a big conch shell.
Yeah.
A lot of people use it to make sound with.
Yeah.
And they use that conch for everything. They crack it and fry it. We make conch salad. We make conch fritters, which are wonderful battered little delights that you dip in a sauce and enjoy as an appetizer in most restaurants. So, yeah, those are the wonderful things. A lot of grouper, a lot of fish, lots of fish.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That sounds wonderful. Did you have siblings growing up as well? Or were you...
There were 4 of us, 2 girls and 2 boys. And I'm second baby. So it was girl, boy, girl, boy.
Oh, okay.
So I have a young brother.
Nice.
And both my brothers were musicians. I came of age in the 60s. So that meant coming of age with so many things that happened in the 60s, including the invasion of all the British bands. So the Rolling Stones and Beatles and so many others. And so it really inspired young men at that time, probably women too, but I didn't know too much about girl bands back then. But it inspired, young guys to get an instrument and play music. So I grew up with that influence, which was also very nice.
That's awesome. What instruments did they play?
My younger brother played guitar, and my older brother played percussion.
Oh,
so he played bongos, and now he's a quite famous musician in New Orleans.
Oh,
and he plays the washboard, which is an original African American instrument.
Oh, that's great.
Have you ever seen it played?
Yes.
The washboard.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, he is a master at it, so he's a joy to go down to New Orleans and watch him perform.
Oh, I bet. That's his main gig down there. He performs throughout the different clubs in the area.
Full-time musician.
That's wonderful. I love that.
You find him Washboard Chaz, CHAZ.com.
Oh, perfect.
Washboard Chaz.
I'm going to look that up. So he's in New Orleans. Where'd the rest of your siblings end up?
Well, let's see. My sister, who sadly passed away this year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
She was living in Massachusetts, and my younger brother is still in New York City. He lives in Harlem.
Oh, nice. Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were growing up, you were influenced by music, by entrepreneurship, by nursing and wellness. And then you said that you went to undergrad in Ohio. What was that transition like? What made you decide that college?
Well, let me just share first that I also had another huge influence, and that was the arts. My cousin was an incredible artist, a Broadway performer. Her name is Diana Sands. And if you've ever seen the original production of A Raisin in the Sun, she was in the original Broadway production of A Raisin in the Sun in 1959.
Oh, wow.
And she played Sidney Poitier's kid sister.
Wow.
And it was a wonderful story. And that was her first Broadway play. She was just 25 at the time. And then she went on to do a total of 6 Broadway shows in the 60s. She was quite the phenomenon.
Wow.
And so I grew up with that Broadway energy, with the theater energy. She started making films, so I got to know that community a little bit. So people like, James Earl Jones and Alan Alda, and these are all people that she worked with and would be at our home for events. Wow. So that was a wonderful, wonderful exposure also, just to be a part of the arts, to experience the arts firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. And on such a high level, it sounds like, with such talented and skilled people. That's amazing.
Right.
Wow.
Right. So when I graduated high school, there were so many new doors opening. It was 1970. And so suddenly there was the opportunity to consider schools other than just historically Black colleges. The whole world was kind of opened up, which was nice, following the civil rights movement in the 60s. And Antioch is where I went, Antioch College in Ohio. And I chose it because it was unconventional. It was a school that believed in work study. And while I was a scholar, I was, National Honor Society and all that stuff in high school, I really wanted a different kind of rigor. I didn't want the Harvard rigor. I wanted an experience that fostered a belief in you of figuring out who you were in the world, not just who you were academically, but who are you? What do you want to do? Where do you belong in the world? And so in addition to a work-study program, they also encouraged Antioch education abroad. So they encouraged you to go and travel and see the world. And so I did that quite a bit, which was a wonderful, wonderful thing for me.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing. And it was because it was work-study and because there was so much international education, it was a 5-year program. And literally the first year you go on campus in Ohio for 3 months, and then you go out for a quarter, and you work somewhere, and then you come back on campus and you take what you've learned in the work world and apply it to your academics, and then you take your academics back out into the work world. So it was just this really wonderful way of, really connecting with the whole world around you.
Oh, wow. That sounds, that sounds like a wonderful opportunity. So kind of academic classroom focused, then work and implementation of the knowledge focus. So back and forth throughout the 5 years. That's wonderful.
Years. I think the easiest way to describe it is it's like a Montessori experience, only it's a college.
Oh, wow.
We were able to write proposals for ideas that we wanted to pursue and study. Of course, there was a curriculum and there was deans and all the normal things that you find in a college. But there was also lots of independent study work that was enabled in that experience. It was mostly pass-fail as opposed to competitive grades.
Right.
So that was fostering less of a competitive energy amongst the students and more of a camaraderie and a coming together of people, which was very, very special. We did not have intercollegiate sports. We did not have sororities and fraternities because we had so many other things to focus on. Back in 1970, a gym requirement was yoga.
Ah, good. Nice. Yeah.
They had health food dorms and health food co-ops on campus.
Wow.
So I really learned a lot. I mean, building on what I had grown up with my mom, I went into a place of really understanding holistic living and the importance of, baking your own bread and getting away from chemicals and avoiding beef and, in a place like Ohio, right? There's lots of cattle farming.
Right.
But we students who were really, food activists and health activists and saying, these are the things you need to do. And so I became partial vegetarian while I was there. And I did study yoga way back then. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience.
It sounds like it. Sounds like such a great fit, especially straight out of high school, to be able to just be immersed in such what sounds like a positive environment and so rich with different options and opportunities. What was the kind of work that you did when you were in the quarters, that you were out and about in the world? What was the type of work that you were doing?
Well, I did some very interesting things. Before I went off to college, as I said, I grew up in the 60s. And so after the riots of the long, hot summer, 1967, I know this is all history for you, but it's what I lived.
Right.
President Johnson encouraged corporations, if they were located in your communities, to create programs. Remember, this is before there were internships and co-op programs that didn't really exist. So Johnson encouraged these companies to create job opportunities for the kids to kind of keep them off the streets, avoid the long, hot summer. So I was not a particularly at-risk youth, but I was in a community where these opportunities were made available. And so I worked for a company called General Foods Corporation, which now has been merged into Kraft and then merged into Philip Morris. But at the time, it was a standalone company. And it had products that you probably know, like Jell-O pudding and Kool-Aid and all those fun beverages, Tang instant breakfast drink, and all the Bird's Eye frozen vegetables, etc. So they hired about 68 students that they hired to give them jobs. And all the girls were sort of channeled off to be clerk typists, and all the boys were channeled off to be Xeroxers. They just worked all day long in the reproduction office, right? And when I arrived to work, and this was in my senior year in high school, I was advised that I was going to be given a special position. And I was going to be given a marketing position, which I had never heard of. To me, marketing was going to the supermarket.
Right.
The females in my family were not business people. No one in my family, besides my dad, who was an entrepreneur, were really business people. So I didn't have that vocabulary. I didn't have that understanding of the way the business world worked. And I had two managers, one who had graduated from Stanford Business School and another who had graduated from Harvard Business School, who felt their contribution to the 60s was to take a woman, a young girl who probably wouldn't have opportunities in the business world, and create that opportunity. So they created a marketing position, and I was the one chosen for it after a series of interviews at my school and meeting with my teachers. And it was really, really a rich experience because it was challenging in that it was a time, as I said, there were no other interns. So I was the youngest one thrown in with all of these, professional people. So I had to really learn quickly how to hold my own in that situation. I commuted into the city for meetings with the advertising agencies. So I learned how to travel, business travels, all those things that, 17, 18 years old, it's a wonderful experience. So when I was ready to go off to college, they knew that Antioch had a work-study program. So they invited me to come back anytime I wanted to. And my thought was, well, at that time I really wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be an educator. So I didn't think I would do that. When I got to Antioch and I applied for all the education jobs, they all turned out to be room and board only. So there was no money, and I needed to earn money to help pay for school. So I realized, okay, I guess I can't really do that. I'll go back home, live at home, and work at General Foods so that I could save money. And they recognized that an opportunity would include the full breadth of experience, showing me all the different phases of marketing. So they had me work in sales one time, and then another time they had me work at their ad agency in New York City. So I commuted every day into the city and had the whole world of advertising opened up to me. And I was a child who loved to sing jingles. That was sort of a joke my dad and I would have, singing every jingle that came on the radio. I'd learn it, play it back. And then suddenly here I am in the advertising world. And that was exciting, just to understand how commercials are made and the power and the influence that you have there. So I eventually shifted my major away from education because I was just seeing so much in the world. I was in Ohio at the dawn of the cable industry, and Ohio was a model city for cable. So I had a course in communications that took me up to Dayton, Ohio, where we would sit in on the community access meetings, because in the beginning that was a big part of cable, that the community would have access to cable. So I got to watch that industry from the ground up, which was also pretty exciting. So I decided to do a dual major. I did a major in communications and in business administration.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Just a chain of wonderful opportunities that kind of guided you to that spot. That sounds amazing.
Exactly right. And,
Wow.
I really respected business from what I was experiencing in the workplace, right? That's what made me say, I should really study this a little bit more. And then in the academic space, I was learning so much about communications through the cable industry and through so many other things that were happening at the time, and the really wonderful instructors that I had. So that's how I created that combination. And then what led me to entrepreneurship is each time I'd go back to General Foods Corporation to work, I would get back, and people that I had met, I was there at a time when women were just starting to come into the workplace, coming out of the major graduate schools of business and finance and economics. And, I'd gotten to know them. And then when I'd go back, they were gone. And I would say, well, what happened to, so-and-so? Well, she couldn't get promoted. So she had to leave and go to Lever Brothers or another company to be able to get the promotion. In other words, it was the glass ceiling.
Oh.
And I was able to witness that glass ceiling in just such a profound way, by coming and going, and then seeing the people that I knew and loved who were mentoring me and helping me along, just gone because they just couldn't get ahead.
Oh.
And I said, gee, as a Black woman, I've got 2 strikes against me. That's going to be hard. So I made the choice then that I would go the route my father went and become an entrepreneur.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And then I also had, these other wonderful experiences that helped me see that there were so many different possibilities in the world to do. So in addition to going back to work for General Foods Corporation, sometimes I worked for my sister's organization, which was a communications network. She was involved with helping people on the street, regular people, learn how to take advantage of the cable industry, how to use videotape to go out into the streets and create your own stories. And so I worked for her in Jamaica. So that's what first took me to the island of Jamaica, because Jamaica in 1973 was bustling and it was exciting, and the prime minister had interesting and new ideas, and it was coming into, independence. So many of the Caribbean islands were coming into their independence. And so I went to Jamaica, and it was such a rich experience. And I was doing research and documenting some of the things that were going on for her production company. So that was one.
I see.
I also had a chance. My very first travel was after my first year. So my first summer, I went to Ghana, and I went on a Peace Corps-like program called Operation Crossroads Africa. And that was just the most amazing, phenomenal experience on so many levels. Just to be in a Black country was quite amazing, where all of your administrators, your bank people, everybody you deal with, African American. I mean, Black. They look like you.
Yeah.
And so that was exciting. And then there was also the experience, coming out of the 60s, where African Americans had adopted being connected to Africa as we struggled to find our identity, and coming out of what we came out of slavery, basically, struggling to find our identity. And when we identified with Africa, we were wearing dashikis and we were wearing Afro hairdos, and then I get to Africa and I realize how American I really am. And that was very profound, because I hadn't thought of myself particularly as an American. Because when you're a minority in this country, so often you don't feel like you're part of it. You're sort of on the sidelines looking in. So the experience that I had was I was in a work camp in the center of Ghana, a very small little region called Branga-Hafo, a little tiny town called Wenchi. There was no electricity, no running water. It was very, very rustic. And we were relocating houses that every year suffered from floods when the Niger River overflowed. So we were moving those houses back up, higher up. And literally, what we were doing is making bricks and carrying the bricks to the mason every single day. And we could only work so many hours because it was so hot for Americans. We weren't used to that, to the heat of the African climate. So we worked from 8 to noon every day. And then we stopped when that noon sun came in, and we rested. And then in the afternoon, we'd go out and connect with villagers and have a really rich exchange. And we worked with counterparts, and there was a Ghanaian counterpart that I had befriended, and he wanted me to come to the village and meet his family. He asked if I would be willing to do that. I said, be more than happy to. And he was the first generation to speak English. So I get to the village, and it's this beautiful traditional gathering of welcoming this visitor. And you had everyone from the grandfather all the way down to the babies, and we were all sitting around, and they poured something called palm wine in a gourd, and they passed that gourd around person to person. We all had to sip from the gourd, and that was part of the welcoming. And then as soon as, that was done, the grandson was translating for the grandfather. And the grandfather's traditional garb, and he's got a staff, and he's sitting there very much in command. And he had asked if I would be willing to answer some questions. I said, of course, be happy to. The very first question was, is it true that Americans walked on the moon? And I was like, oh, how did they know that? Because, there was no TV, no radio. It's like, oh, wow,
right.
they're aware of these things. So that was a surprise to me. And I, with tremendous pride, my chest got bigger, and I said, absolutely, we did, And it was just the Americanism in me. We were bred to believe that this was an important thing to do, to go to the moon,
Right.
John Kennedy's dream. And then the next question came, and I couldn't wait for the translation because it was such a simple question. I could tell we used very little words. And when the translation came, the question was, why? And I was floored because I realized, I don't really know why. It's just, we're Americans. That's what we do. I suddenly discovered that here I am with a value system that's connected to the United States, and I'm in a culture where it's a very different value system. And that's when I learned that people have different values all over the world. We're not all exactly thinking the same way. And I came from a culture that was very proud to, fly a spacecraft to the moon and even leave debris up there, right? Probably left some Coke cans, and we certainly, left our flag and whatever else we left on the moon.
Right.
And I'm in a culture that believed the sun, the moon, the stars were sacred objects for all of mankind, all of humankind. And that was, I can't even tell you what a rude awakening that was. And from that moment on, I vowed that I would begin to understand the world in a different way. And that's exactly what Antioch wanted us to do. To discover ourselves in the world. Who are we? Who are we in the world?
Wow.
It was very profound.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say. It sounds like it was very profound. Wow. What an amazing experience. Yeah, to kind of have that separation from our culture that as you grow up in it, you don't really realize what's ingrained until you kind of separate yourself or are separated from it and immersed into a different culture. So important to travel in that way and meet more and more people.
I really remember, how proud I was that, oh my gosh, they know we walked on the moon. I was so proud of that because it was just part of the American way,
Right.
And when he asked the question why, it was like, oh. And I knew in the instant right then that it wasn't judgmental, but it was like, your values are very different from ours. That was very clear. And when I came back to campus and, processed that experience and built it into my coursework and shared what I learned, I really wanted to be in a Black country again. I knew that I wanted to have that experience. It's so hard to explain. It's so hard to explain what the experience is like of being this extreme minority in a really dominant culture. And it was so refreshing to be in a Black country. And I wanted to go back, but it was very expensive to get to Africa. And, my family didn't have lots of money. And so just going that far, first of all, the airfare, and then, of course, being able to call home was extremely expensive back then. It's before cell phones. Everything was a long-distance call.
Right.
And that's part of why I went to Jamaica. I said, oh, well, Jamaica's a very interesting place, and it's closer, more affordable. So that's when I worked with my sister to go to Jamaica. And that was in the springtime of 1973. It was such an incredibly beautiful country. Have you ever been to Jamaica?
I haven't, and I would love to go. I so many places I would love to go, but that is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
And
I was there just at the time things were really bustling. Reggae was, becoming more popular.
Yeah.
Jimmy Cliff is a reggae artist whose movie had just come out, The Harder They Come. And art houses in New York City. And I went to see the film before I went to Jamaica so I could understand the culture a little bit better. And it was really, there was something magical about Jamaica that was really special for me.
And you were there for the summer, for a few
I was
months?
I was there like, because remember we were quarters on, quarters off. So I think it was a winter quarter that I was there, which also was nice to be out of the winter.
Oh, I bet.
Out of Ohio winter. Yeah, that was nice. That was special.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So you were able to be there and work for your sister, but still have that be a part of your undergrad curriculum. That's so cool. I love that.
Oh, yeah, because you had to have work credits as well as academic credits to graduate. Yeah. And, I was able to connect to the arts there since that had been a part of my upbringing. And, the Jamaica School of Dance and the National Dance Theater Company of Jamaica were places that I frequented. And that was an exciting time because as part of the independence, they had this national dance company that really traveled the world to sing the praises of Jamaica. So it was a very, very exciting and enriching time. I came back to campus. And then that summer, I was on campus. Yeah, it was winter that I was in Jamaica, and then I spent spring on campus. And then summer, I went back to New York to work. And that summer, my cousin, Diana Sands, took very sick. She came down with a very rare form of cancer, which we found out about in July, and she was gone by September.
Oh, wow.
39 years old. She just turned 39.
Really? Wow.
The height of her career. It was just a devastating experience for our family because we were all very, very close. And, I would produce events in my high school and she would come and perform. She taught me so many different things about life, and she was a real role model and inspiration. And so when she took so sick, and I spent a lot of time at Sloan Kettering with her in those final days, and it was really beyond traumatizing. And, it was before we really understood grief and grief counseling. And so I was sort of flailing myself, trying to figure this out. And for each of my family members, it was very traumatic. My brother and she were the only left-handed people in the family. So she always taught him how to do everything, tie his shoes, tie his tie. She took us all bowling so she could teach him how to bowl with his left hand, because there we were, not knowing what to do. We were trying to show my brother how to do things with his right hand. And of course, that's like just turning his cells upside down, And she just said, no, I'm going to teach him. And so she took him under her wing. So I share that to say that each member of my family was in their own trauma at her death. Yeah. My father, the bon vivant, who loved restaurants, always threw the closing night parties for her shows, which is how I was able to be around wonderful people like James Earl Jones and Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis and wonderful people that would come to these parties that were, at our home. And we were even planning where I would go on one of her film shoots. She was just moving into the film industry. And she had just done a film in Sweden while I was actually in Ghana. She was in Sweden filming Georgia, which is the only screenplay that Maya Angelou ever wrote. And she performed in that movie. And we talked about it. And I said, I've got this work-study program and I can come and help you sometimes. And so we had planned on her next film that I would be there as her assistant, which would have been a wonderful experience. Wow. Communications degree. So that was, that was part of what was lost when she was lost. And so I went back to campus, it was just wonderful that I happened to be in New York at that time and I could be there and support the family as much as possible. I went back to campus for the fall quarter and I was just broken. I couldn't function. And I remembered the energy that I felt in Jamaica and I thought, I should go back to Jamaica. That might be a place where I could heal, because I knew I was just in horrific pain. I was angry with God. I was angry with the world. I just didn't understand how this could happen.
Yeah.
And then all of her peers, Cecily Tyson and Diane Carroll and, Shirley MacLaine and all the others, their lives went on, but her life ended. It was just so hard to process. Yeah. And so I wrote a proposal that I study at the Jamaica School of Art, since I had discovered it when I was there earlier, and the Jamaica School of Dance. And that would lead toward my communications degree. And so in 1974, I went back to Jamaica and I was there for, I guess, probably about 9 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was able, but after your first year, you could start to string quarters together. The first year, you have to go quarter on, quarter off, quarter on, quarter off. But after that, you could string and do 9 months on somewhere working, and then 9 months back on campus, or 9 months out working. 9 months overseas, And so that's what I did, a long stint. And it was a healing experience on many, many levels, just being in that energy of Jamaica. I think of it as a vortex. There's just an energy there that's so powerful.
Mm.
And I hooked up with a roommate who was also in her own level of pain around whatever her issues were.
Mm-hmm.
And, like attracts like. So we were running around in pain together, and we smoked a lot of ganja to try to ease that pain.
Mm-hmm.
And we hung out with a friend of hers who was living with a musician. And so we'd go to the house and just hang out literally almost every day. Right after I would go to my classes in the morning, dance and art classes, and then we'd go there and just hang out. And we were 3 Black women, African-American women, experiencing Jamaica and sharing our stories. It turns out that the musician she was living with, whose house I spent all my time in every day, was Bob Marley.
Oh, wow.
I know. You
Wow.
froze, so I'm not sure what. Oh, there, you're back now.
I'm here. I did freeze also. Like, what? That's amazing.
And it was amazing. It was 1974, and it was before he was well known. I had never heard of him.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that there were always musicians coming and going, a guy named Peter Tosh would come through, and Bunny Will would come through, and Family Man, and all these. I remember the names so well. They would always move through the space, and every night we'd be in the yard, and they'd be playing their band, doing their thing. And it didn't strike me as odd because, again, I grew up with musicians. So, I mean, in the 60s, everybody had a band. So it wasn't odd to me that, and then, of course, back then you couldn't Google, couldn't look people up. You just had people as you met them,
Yeah.
And he was a very, very, very intense person, very serious. But he could laugh, big, beautiful smile. And I noticed that he would, sort of laser in on me. Like I'd catch him, staring at me, because he'd come into the room where the 3 of us ladies were hanging out. But, it was the Rasta culture. So men were with the men and women were with the women. But we were in a space where he also had his gym. So he would come in and do his bench presses, just sit there and bench press and literally just stare at us. Now, of course, I know why part of that staring was happening. In the moment, I had no idea, but he was trying to get his music into the United States. So I'm sure part of that staring was trying to figure out, who are these African-American people? Who are these people? How can I get my music into their ears somehow? But I would also notice many times he'd be staring at me and he wouldn't look away. His gaze was very, very intense. So I couldn't figure out what that was about. At the time I was wearing long granny dresses, so I thought maybe, he saw me as respectful of the Rasta culture since I didn't have on jeans like so many other, American women would. I never understood it, but then one night we were standing in the yard and the band was playing, and he was playing his song, No Woman, No Cry, which is one of his signature songs. And he locked my gaze, stared at me intently the entire time. And then I just felt this energy from him where I felt him saying, and we all are partly psychic. Mine was pretty developed, and I could feel this psychic energy coming from him. And basically he was giving me the message that you can't go on like this. You can't carry this pain. You have to let it go. And by the time the song was finished, all of that rage and anger and hurt just drained from my body. It was really, really intense.
Wow.
And I knew that this man was a shaman, and this was a healing experience. I was raised Catholic, so I was familiar with ritual, right? The ritual of the Catholic Church. And I felt that I was in this ritual with this person. And I literally went back to my apartment. I used to use I had planned to apply to graduate school, so I had my Stanford application, my Harvard application. It's what I used to clean my weed on. So I had my twigs and my seeds, and I cleaned it. I went home, I dusted all of that off, sat down, filled out those applications.
Oh, wow.
I took the graduate record exam, the entry exams for grad school, and somehow I managed to pass. I was just, I was so broken. I don't even know how I did it, but I was accepted to Stanford, and I came back to Ohio to finish up, graduate, and then that fall I was at Stanford University. But I always attribute Bob with saving my life, because I don't think I was going to make it home from Jamaica. I was really in a bad way.
Mm.
When you're deep in depression, you don't have, there wasn't even anyone to say, hey, you're depressed. There wasn't even that. It was just every day trying to drag myself through the day into the night so I could sleep again. I mean, that's what life was. And, as I say, now I understand it as depression, but that wasn't something that was talked about in the Black community. If you felt down, you went to church.
Right.
We didn't have psychotherapy. I hooked up with a guy, and, he had a motorcycle, and he also was an outcast. The energy attracts like energy. And, he was a middle-class Jamaican who had chosen to become a Rastafarian, and that was considered, the dregs of the earth back then. Bob was not respected in society at that time. And they used to have to hide their dreads. You couldn't let your dreadlocks be seen in Kingston. So, we'd jump on the motorcycle, no helmet, speeding around these curves, going way up in the hills. And then, the tan would come off and they'd shake the dreads free. And that was his freedom. And his family had pretty much disowned him because he had chosen to become Rastafarian. Oh. So that was another thing that was happening in Jamaica, this rising up of the independent spirit of, getting independence from the Queen, and also figuring out who you were, who you were, what did you stand for? And Bob's music was all about that. Get up, stand up for your rights. I mean, that's, what the energy was, the fervor was at the time. And so, he was troubled because, he was estranged from his family, but he wanted to understand and adopt the Rastafarian religion. So, we were all just a mess. We were just a mess. All of us trying to find our way, at 21, 22 years old.
Yeah.
Like I said, riding on those hills and getting high every day, just like, it wasn't a good time. And it's Bob who just said, nope, this is not your life. You will let all of that go. So
connected with it and saw it in you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
He did. And that's what the staring was. He was reading my energy and realizing this, you can't go on like this.
Yeah. Wow. That's remarkable. Yeah. What a unique story that led you into grad school.
Oh my God, I was going to say, I went from there to Stanford University, where I sat next to the chairman of the board of General Motors' son, and I sat next to all these different prominent, powerful people. I'd come from the most powerful experience there is.
Wow. Yeah. Kind of after that, I imagine all that stuff feels like less, or, it's like, oh, you're just another human, because here's what I've been through.
That's right. Exactly.
Oh, wow.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
And Antioch, Stanford was a challenge because, Antioch was not a competitive environment. It was a rigorous environment.
Yeah.
A professor could tell from having a 1-hour discussion with you whether or not you knew the material. You didn't have to take a test for him to know that.
Sure.
But suddenly I'm in an environment that is traditionally competitive. I would show up for an exam and forget to bring a pencil, and I'd get there and everybody else had 10 pencils sharpened, lined up, calculated, charged. And I was like, oh, darn, I didn't think to bring a pencil. It was really, really a challenge. So the whole first year was just figuring out how to play the game, how to be in that competitive environment. I was in a program where everybody had come from Dartmouth or Yale or Harvard, really rigorous, competitive environments. And so I had to find my way into that world after 5 years of being more Montessori and easy flow. And yes, intelligence was a large part of it, but it was a different kind of energy. So the way I describe it that makes the most sense is that Antioch taught me how to smell the flowers, and Stanford taught me how to cut them and sell them. And I'm grateful that I had both experiences, because cutting and selling was not the only thing I knew. And for many people that I was in school with, that was kind of the only thing they knew.
That makes a lot of sense. And probably that order too, because when you're right out of high school, so many people have a hard time, like they just leap into something that they feel like they should do, but you need that time to figure out what your focus is and what your passion is. And like what you were saying, you shifted from wanting to be an educator to doing what you pursued, so like you needed that time and that a little more freedom of what Antioch sounds like it provided for you to be able to try these different things throughout the 5 years. That sounds amazing. Like, where is this unicorn school and how come we don't have more of them?
I know. Right? It's in Yellow Springs, Ohio.
Yeah, it's amazing. Wow.
Mhm.
Amazing.
You know the artist, the comedian Dave
Oh,
Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle. Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh, did he go
So
there?
his father was a professor at Antioch and was one of my advisors.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah,
So
because he's from Ohio, isn't
he's
he?
from Ohio, from Yellow
That's right.
Springs, Ohio, and he
Oh,
was a
that's
little boy
right.
running around on campus when I
Oh,
was
my
there.
goodness. That's amazing.
It is amazing. Mm-hmm.
Wow. You got your graduate degree in, remind me, did you already tell me?
I
What
have
did you
no,
get your?
I have an MBA in marketing.
Okay.
Based.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Oh, yes. The learning how to sell and all that. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Did you go straight into entrepreneurship after that? Or I imagine there was a few steps in
No, there were a few
between.
steps. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur at the time I went to graduate school, but I also knew it was important to have some work experience to really understand how
Mm-hmm.
business works. And
Mm-hmm.
so I gave myself 10 years. And I'm very goal oriented. I said,
Yeah.
10 years, I'll play this corporate game, and then I'll be on my own. I'll be independent. And almost 10
Nice.
years to the day, I went out on my own. But
Oh,
I
wow.
came back to New York and I fell in love with advertising. So I worked on Madison Avenue. And that was exciting. While I was out at Stanford, I interviewed with companies. I interviewed with Leo Burnett in Chicago, which is the major agency there. I interviewed with agencies out in San Francisco. And I realized that, the real industry is in New York.
Mm.
The others kind of branch offices, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And because Stanford was such a quantitative institution, and everybody was smitten with investment banking, which was the new thing when I was there.
Mm.
And it was hard to even be considered for advertising. So coming out of my Antioch experience of writing independent studies, I did an independent study project where I interviewed women in San Francisco who worked for advertising agencies, just so that I could begin to get a sense of what ad
Oh.
agencies were all about and, what was it like in different parts of the country. And I knew right then and there I wanted to be back in New York. And the other thing, too, is that I wanted to understand all of the women that I had met in business were not married, or if they were married, they had no children. And I
Mm.
knew I wanted to be a mom. And so I wanted to find out, what women's choices were once they came into the business world. Because you got to understand, this was the beginning of women coming into management. And
Mm-hmm.
many of them chose to make, I don't know if they had to, but they chose to make those trade-offs, to not have children so that they could just work, those 80-hour weeks and be the superstar. And that's kind of what was required.
Right.
So I spent 10 years on Madison Avenue and then started my own company, my first company. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Amazing. So when you had mentioned that when you were in undergrad working in New York, you had seen mentors and people come and go from the agency that you were working with. Did you notice in the 10 years after graduate school, did you notice that anything had shifted, or did you kind of run up against the glass ceiling
Oh,
in a
absolutely.
way?
Absolutely, I did. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely, I did. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, things had shifted in that there were more women coming into the workspace.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were some who actually could manage to have a family and still be successful in business. But there was still a lot of racism and a lot of sexism
Mm-hmm.
that I
Yeah.
had to confront. Mm-hmm.
Still
Yeah.
today too. Yeah.
And even, yeah, it's still to today,
Yeah.
for sure. Because even,
Mm-hmm.
with starting my most recent business, the wellness app, I spent all of 2020 trying to raise money to start this company. And I had many strikes against me. I mean,
Mm.
I was East Coast, and most of the venture capital money is given to, Silicon Valley related companies or in that
Right.
area. So there was geography against me. Most of the venture capital goes to men, not women.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the venture capital go to young people, not older people. You could be 25 with a mediocre idea and get funded quicker than a 40-year-old with a fabulous idea.
Right. Right.
So I had all of those challenges, but I just was determined to find the capital to start the company that I wanted to create.
Mm-hmm.
And I got lucky. I found it turned out to be someone I knew, a friend who just believed in my concept, and she became my seed investor,
Oh, wonderful.
which enabled us to build the company. And we are OneFireLight.com, and we're a wellness and fitness app. And so all of our classes tie into the different modalities of wellness. So we offer yoga and Pilates, but also strength training and cardio and boxing but then also meditation and sound healing. So it's a wonderful, wonderful array of everything that would help you calm your mind and move your body and nourish your soul. And one of the best parts about it is that we use the music of Bob Marley and the Wailers.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Because I knew that his energy was a healing energy. And I felt, why not bring that energy into the fitness and wellness space? And people really enjoyed it. I mean, Bob Marley is one of the artists that you still hear all the time. You know, his music is seen on TV, heard on TV for ads. You know, Sandals uses his music, and there's a home security company that's using his music right now. Oh. So invariably, you know, don't worry about a thing. Everything's going to be all right.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And when the pandemic hit, streams of his music, and this was reported by Billboard magazine, streams of his music went up, I think it was 23% worldwide, because people just reached for the energy of that music.
Yeah.
So all of those reasons, you know, led me to think this could be a very interesting and different kind of wellness experience if you could have your wellness connected to what we know is very healing and powerful music.
Oh, absolutely.
Not every cardio class has to have blaring techno music. You could have a good cardio class to get up, stand up for your rights, or a good cardio class for Could You Be Loved? Such really wonderful, wonderful songs. And so it's been very exciting. We're a year old, and we're looking now to scale, go a little bit bigger. So we're back out in the investment capital world looking for additional funding beyond the seed investment that we had. And we're looking to grow the company, and we feel it can grow in so many different ways, you know, with so many different kinds of offerings. One of the things we're developing right now is, you know, we're innovative. We do things very, very differently. We shoot all of our classes in nature because we think that's also a healing element. You know, you could look at a box and see people doing a workout in just a square space, or you could look at your frame and see trees and waterfalls and other beautiful things. So we've shot in Jamaica, we've shot throughout Long Island and upstate New York, but mostly outdoors. And it's just the idea of bringing nature into the experience is a wonderful thing. The nature, the music of Bob Marley, and then we do innovative things like bringing in sound healing. One of our sound healers even has Bob playing in and out of the Tibetan singing bowls that he's working with. So that's pretty exciting.
That's really cool.
We just launched 28 new classes that are done with crystals. And we're starting to get a lot of traction. People are excited about this idea. So one of the other things we're working on is a series of support classes for people with COVID long haulers. There are at least 19 million people suffering with COVID long haulers. And there isn't a lot of support for them right now. There's some studies, you know, NYU Langone and a few other medical institutions have studies where they're looking at it, but it hits our family very closely because one of our editors is a long hauler survivor. And I understand from him what the ordeal is like. He nearly died of COVID. And then one of our instructors, Patrick, is trained by the World Health Organization, certified to actually provide support, fitness support for long haulers. So we're looking at creating a curriculum for people with long haul so that we're able to provide this service to them. So that's what we're really about, healing, you know, in these challenging times, finding a different way of providing wellness support. That's really what we're about.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I think I saw that you are focused on helping a diverse array of people with different challenges. So ADHD or maybe I didn't see that. Okay, and autism and yeah, I think that's amazing.
Yoga programs for people with breast cancer. You know, so yeah, using these modalities in innovative ways. You know, helping people to really move through the physical challenges, and sometimes they're emotional challenges that they're dealing with.
Yeah. And so the gap between when you shifted to your own entrepreneurship and to starting this app, I believe I saw that you have trained in yoga, meditation, and instructing those. And then, so this app kind of comes from that foundation, I imagine. And does it spur from your other entrepreneurship that you've been doing in the meantime?
Yes. The first business I started was an ad agency. I started an ad agency that specialized in Black consumer market advertising.
Oh, nice.
Because, I try to be a problem solver, and I had seen so many ads that were just offensive to Black people. I mean, I could give you a whole presentation on that. As a matter of fact, we put together a presentation. That's how we would get clients, because we'd go in and we'd show them, what is offensive in these ads. And if you're not in that culture, you wouldn't even notice it.
Right.
And it still happens today. I see ads and I just say, oh, they're going to get Black people working at these ad agencies,
Right.
So that was the first company. And what we wanted to do was bring more dignity to the messaging that went out to African American people. And I ran that company for 4 years with a partner. And then eventually we had partnership issues, right? So that caused us to split. And I moved into a field that I'd been interested in from my days in Ghana, and that was international marketing. So I started an international marketing company. And at the time, the project that I was working on took me to Japan. And I had never been to Japan, of course. And it was a time when the Japanese were being criticized because they were doing things that were derogatory toward African American people. They had Sambo dolls that they were intrigued with and had them in the store windows. And so they were really heavily criticized in the media. So I was very nervous about going. And it's my daughter. My daughter was 9 at the time. She's my co-founder in this business now. But she was a little girl. And we traveled in 1990 to Japan to work on this project. I was doing work for the Albanelli American Dance Theater, and I wanted to create promotional materials for them in Japanese because they toured in Japan. So that was the reason why I went. And when I got there, I learned that, no, they don't do promotion in the same way we did. We created this 20-page supplement in the New York Times about Albanelli, and I thought we could just take that same supplement, all the creative had been produced already, just translate it into Japanese and run it there for when the company goes to Japan. Very logical idea, but you get there and you realize, oh no, culturally they don't do those things. They don't, an insert in their major newspaper is like a cartoon.
Oh, I see.
Because they come from manga, right? That's what rules. So that was exciting to just learn, wow, this is a totally different culture. It's going to be so interesting to figure out how to do business there. And one of the things that I realized was that Americans were struggling in the Japanese market. This is the time Chrysler was angry because, there was this whole unfair trading accusation against the Japanese auto manufacturing and also the electronics manufacturing, all the TVs and things coming in from Japan. And when I was there, I noticed that the streets are so tiny. You couldn't turn a Chrysler, you couldn't maneuver a Chrysler in the town of Tokyo,
right.
And it's like, wow, how could Americans not know that you've got to tailor the product for the market? It amazed me because there had been so much brouhaha in the media about Japanese are unfair traders and blah, blah, blah. But we didn't meet the market. Whereas the French and the Germans, they had automobiles that met the market. Steering wheel on the other side, for example. I mean, just really basic stuff. Smaller cars that fit in a smaller society, in terms of the landscape, the geography. So I said, oh, this is a real opportunity, to help Americans to understand this culture. And one of the things I found in being in Japan was that the first time I was just an American. I wasn't a minority because they didn't have a perspective on who a minority was. And if they wanted to do business with me, they used the principles that they understood about how Americans do business. They didn't say, oh, she's a Black American, so it's going to be done this way. And also what I learned is that, the Sambo dolls and all those things, one, they weren't aware that they were offensive. And two, some of the offensive things that they did say, they were just repeating what they had heard from other Americans who were traveling.
The media and right. Oh, wow.
So that was another aha moment, realizing that you have to really meet people where they are and try to get to know them, So I absolutely loved Japan, and I worked for most of the 90s in the Japanese market. And I became a certified trade consultant for the state of New York. This is under the first Cuomo, Mario Cuomo. And at that same time, the South African market was opening up in 1994 after Mandela was released from prison. And there was this opening of the market because there had been the boycotts where we wouldn't do business in South Africa. But then once the government changed and apartheid was stricken, the opportunities emerged, and New York State asked if I would go and begin to explore that market for New York State small businesses. And so I started working in South Africa as well. And it was just when I started doing trade missions, taking small cadres of American companies over to South Africa. And I set up all of the business meetings and the government briefings, et cetera, in the country. It was a wonderful time. It was
Wow.
really an exciting time. That feeling of nationalism and pride. And, I got to meet Nelson Mandela, and it was really very, very, very
Wow.
special time.
Wow. Sounds like it. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
So that was the international business that I ran. And I did that from probably about a good 15 years. And then in 2000, I wanted to focus more on my writing career. Always loved to write. And I have all these books inside of me that I have not yet finished. But I placed myself at Essence Magazine. I went to work on special projects at Essence Magazine so that I could be around writers and editors and the whole field of creating the written words on a monthly basis. And that was exciting on so many levels. I worked with Susan Taylor, who at that time was the editor-in-chief, and then she became editorial director. And I had the opportunity to work with really brilliant Black women, young Black women who were writers and editors and artists. And Susan had a political focus. So it was the time of the Gulf War. And there was one senator, I believe she was, who voted against the war, and a Black woman, and she was being given such a hard time. And so we did a fundraiser to help her campaign so that she could be reelected. I'm not thinking of her name right now, but she was the sole voice, to the only vote against the invasion of Iraq. So, we were involved with cultural things. We put together this beautiful, beautiful day of convention, if you will, for Black women, for African-American business women. It was a business conference, a day-long conference that we did at the Pierre Hotel, which is one of the finest hotels in New York City. And my brother, my younger brother, the guitar player, also took after my father and became a chef. And he was the first African-American chef to work at the Pierre Hotel. And so he was assigned to our group of women, and he tailored all the food to the African-American palate. It was so incredible. Women were just blown away when they came. We had over 500 women that attended from all walks of life. We had wonderful speakers and powerful panels all day, wonderful meals throughout the day. So that was the kind of work that I was able to do at Essence. And then, of course, as I say, work on my writing. And it was while I was there, someone turned me on to yoga, Bikram yoga, which is what I fell in love with. And I had been doing dance up until then with the Alvin Ailey Company, taking classes at the school. Because I've always enjoyed dance or yoga or something for exercise as opposed to gyms, right? That's never been my thing. And then I felt my knees sort of giving out with dance. It's like, okay, it's probably time for yoga now. And I was searching for a yoga practice, and someone at Essence turned me on to Bikram, and I went to class, and it was like, love at first sight. I enjoyed the heat. I enjoyed the same routine every day so that you could see your own progress. And I practiced for about 5 years. And one of the lead instructors there started convincing me that I should think about becoming a teacher. And that was the last thing in my mind. I never imagined I would be a yoga teacher. And she would bug me about it, and it'd go in one ear and out the other. And I would go in the morning before going to Essence, or sometimes after work I'd go. And about the third time she asked me, I finally said, why are you saying this? And this was the senior, sort of the elder teacher in the community. And she looked at me and said, it's because you have compassion. And I was taken aback because I thought she was going to say, oh, because you'd be a good teacher. Well, what does that mean? It was the same energy as that chief in Africa saying, why? Why did you walk on the moon? She said, because you have compassion. And I said, oh. And said, yeah. I mean, I watched you come in, in your 50s and figure out how to make this yoga work in your body. And you will understand what people are going through when they come in and they're stiff and they've never done yoga. They've never moved their bodies. They're terrified of the heat. You'll be able to work with those people. And so then I started thinking about it. And I did my research, and I decided to go to teacher training. And it was in Mexico for 9 weeks. I had to go. Total immersion, total intense immersion. And it was really, really a wonderful experience. So I've been teaching for over 15 years.
Wow.
But I have to share this about my daughter, because I mentioned that, she went with me to Japan, and we had all these wonderful experiences there. And she was concerned. She didn't understand why I would have to go to Mexico for 9 weeks. So she thought I had joined a cult.
Oh.
So she arranged her call. At that time, she was in Boston, where she went to school. She had graduated from Northeastern and stayed up in Boston working. And so she arranged on her calling plan to call Mexico for 7 cents a minute. And every single night she called to make sure I was lucid, that I hadn't drunk Kool-Aid, that I was okay. And every time she called, I would just complain. I'd just say, oh my God, this is so hard. It's so intense. I can't, because we had to learn the dialogue for each of the postures, of 26 postures, and stand up and deliver the dialogue in front of everyone. And I couldn't get it. I just couldn't learn that way under pressure. And, all the students were, in the lobby of the hotel where we were staying, and everybody was drilling each other on the dialogue. And I just couldn't handle that pressure. So my daughter, and I would complain every time she called in. She'd say, Mom, you got to stop. You got to stop putting yourself through this. She said, you got to remember, you're in there with all these 20-somethings, and that's all they've done for the last 15 years is memorize. You haven't memorized anything in 30 years. So just get through the program. You can learn the dialogue later. Just get through it. She became my coach, right?
Yeah.
So when I did graduate after the 9 weeks, and when I went back home, she says, well, and I was living in Jersey at the time. She said, well, you've got to come up to Boston because your graduation present is in Boston. And I said, okay, all right, I'll come to Boston. I was thinking she just was missing me and wanted to see me, but no, she had a real graduation present. So I got on a bus to Boston. When I got there, she had a wardrobe for me, and I had to put it on. She had a chauffeur-driven car. We had to drive to this place, and it turned out to be the final concert of Tina Turner, her final tour.
Oh my goodness.
And she said when we got there, front row seats, she had orchestrated all of this while I was whining and crying every day in teacher training. And she said, Mommy, when we got in our seats, she said, Mommy, I just wanted you to know that if Tina Turner could stand on stage at almost 70 with stilettos and perform, you can get on a podium and teach yoga. You'll be fine. And that was my graduation gift for my daughter.
Oh, that's so sweet, so thoughtful. Oh my goodness. What an amazing memory.
It is an amazing memory. Absolutely. My daughter, as I said, is my co-founder. She is the director of content development. So what that meant in the beginning, because this literally was just an idea, and we have built it into over 500 classes that we've recorded already, and built an app, and we built a website, and we built a community, which is so exciting.
Yeah.
In the very beginning, we had to find instructors. And so she lived on social media, and she would just hashtag fitness, hashtag yoga, hashtag Pilates, and find people and then message them. And not everyone would respond. And then when they did respond, she inquired whether or not she could set up a Zoom meeting with them. And we did a Zoom. We explained the concept to them, and they were all like, Bob Marley music. I mean, we even have ballet classes to Bob Marley music. It's
wonderful.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And so we had them do a demo. They went off and they did a 5-10 minute demo for us to get a sense of how they would work with Bob's music, and for them to get a sense of how they would work with Bob's music. And the demos were amazing, and we hired them to come out and shoot with us, and we built it from there. And then she took over wardrobe because she had been working on Broadway. She worked for the Book of Mormon in the wardrobe department.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
She was a dresser. Purely by accident, she stumbled into the job.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah, someone had been in an accident and couldn't come to work, and she was available and got snapped up by somebody who was in the industry and said, no, you come on, you'll learn this. And so she did. And at the time that happened, I was in India studying meditation. Wow. And I got this text from her saying, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to start. It's going to be so hard. And I wrote it back, and you can do this. You're going to be fine. Just go step in. So suddenly I became her coach.
Yeah. It goes back and forth.
It goes back and forth. Absolutely. She did a phenomenal job. So then she took those skills of wardrobing into creating the wardrobe for all of our instructors. And if you take a look at us on Instagram, we're on Instagram, OneFireLight, right? If you go and you take a look at our Instagram feed, you'll see all these beautiful colors and all
I was
wardrobe.
Noticing that. Yeah.
From her. And then she also, what we would do in Japan, we'd spend summers in Japan, and we were able to live there, as expensive as it is, because we were house sit. In the summers, it would get so hot and humid that most of the foreigners were running the corporations, the Asia Pacific offices would leave for the summer. But they couldn't leave their homes unattended because the mold and mildew would take over. So they, if you went through the American Embassy or the American Center, you could find opportunities to house sit. And that's how we were able to afford to live in Japan.
Wow.
And so we spent many summers there. And so she took that skill into finding our locations. She found these wonderful houses that we wound up shooting in Montauk and Carmel, New York, upstate, Hudson Valley, just wonderful, wonderful locations where we'd shoot our classes and have really a holistic experience for the instructors. They'd come and they'd stay at the house and teach their classes, and it's quite special, and I think it shows in our content.
Seems like it would. Yeah, that's such a wonderful way to approach it. I love that. Mm-hmm. I'm so excited to check out this app. It sounds like it's got all the things, and it's beautiful, it sounds like. So I'm very excited. That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're very excited about it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that must have been your main focus for the past couple of years. Is that correct? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The idea began before the pandemic. And I planned for it to be brick and mortar. I had thought of opening a studio in New York and in LA.
Okay.
And then I thought, and then we should probably do an app so that people in between the two states could participate. And then the pandemic, and I said, pivot or perish. Let's flip it. Let's start with the online version. And then eventually, depending on what happens in the world with the virus, eventually go into brick and mortar.
Brick and mortar is potentially on the horizon still? Yes. Okay.
Still a possibility. And we would love to do festivals all over the world, where you come out and you're listening to Bob Marley's music. The Wailers still perform. Maybe they're performing live and everybody's doing classes. And you have Jamaican food, and a wonderful, wonderful world of wellness is possible. Another dream I have is that we could have different artists, like, say, a John Legend or a Lady Gaga, who would sing Bob's music for wellness. So that they do their own rendition of No Woman, No Cry, or Could You Be Loved, or Is This Love That I'm Feeling, right? Do their own version. Three Little Birds do their version for use in the wellness world.
I like that.
So that's another dream,
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love that. What is something that you are most excited about coming up? It sounds like this app is probably one of the things, but is there anything else that you're excited about coming up?
Yeah, we just launched our e-commerce. So we just added that to the platform. And we have some really wonderful products that are wellness-oriented, wellness-inspired. Have these beautiful ceramic products. We have another ceramic smudge dish with sage, so that when you want to sage your apartment to space clear, you have a little dish that it's in so the embers don't fly all about and cause harm in your home.
Yeah.
We have something called reggae wraps, which are these beautiful sarongs that we have had handmade out of African fabric. And they are wonderful. You can use them as a wrap. You can use them as a meditation shawl. You can spread it over your yoga mat when you relax in your savasana. You can use it as a tablecloth. So we call them reggae wraps. And so that's exciting, is curating these products, having them in our store, and making yet another inroad into helping people find their peace. That's the joy. That's the joy of the work.
Wonderful. I could literally ask you questions for hours longer, but I don't want to keep you too long. But is there anything that I missed talking to you about? I know that people can find you at OneFireLight.com and find all this, like Instagram and TikTok and all the things from that, I imagine. But any other topic that I missed asking you about, or anywhere else that you'd like to point people?
Well, I would just like to say that it is OneFireLight.com, and not the number one, so they can be sure to find us.
Yes.
That's for sure. And, wellness is a real need in the Black community. I mean, it came out during COVID, what a risk so many Black Americans still experience. And so as a Black woman entrepreneur, I'm really very excited that I can have a wellness product that could be of value to our community as well as to the community at large.
Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I've thoroughly enjoyed all of your stories, and I'm sure you have many more. So I'm excited to share this with our community and hope to keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Oh, you are so welcome. Thank you for your interest. I really value that Take Notice is interested in what I'm up to. So I appreciate that very, very much. And we will keep in touch for sure.
Thank you for joining us for Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share it with someone you know. Connect with us on social media. We would love to hear from you. We are at Take Notice Podcast. You can also find us at takenoticepodcast.org. Reviews help us reach more listeners, so please rate and review on your favorite podcast app. Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories is produced, hosted, and edited by Allison Preisinger Higgins. Music by Version Big 5 featuring Darius Higgins. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for taking notice.